Hi, my name is Evangeline Morse. I'm with the Danville Conservation Commission, and we are here at Rogers Lot in North Danville, on the way to North Danville. And we are with Emily Meacham, and she's going to introduce herself. But we are going to learn all about invasive plants and what they look like, and hopefully how we can control them.
Yes, thank you so much. I don't really need to say much more than that. I'm Emily Meacham. I work for the state of Vermont with the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. I'm a forester and I'm a forest health specialist, so I cover insects, diseases, and now I cover a little bit of invasive plants. Kind of a generalist, but I've taken a special interest into invasive plants. I'm out of the St. Johnsbury office, so I cover the entire Northeast Kingdom. All 3 counties up here, Essex, Orleans, Caledonia, and we do a lot of different monitoring efforts, but we also assist the public when they have any questions about tree health or forest health in general. So people are allowed to contact me. I can come out and visit for free. People always try and pay me. You can't pay me. Your taxes paid me. So anytime people have forest health questions, they can contact me. But anyway, yes, we're going to walk today and talk about invasive plants. Dave Houston is here also, who is an expert and taught my past boss, so that's something. And we'll talk about invasive plants. I know there's a couple here, but we can also point out other insects and diseases that we see along the way, if that's okay. Yes, for all of you, people don't know, and it kind of is word of mouth, but one of the smaller pieces of the job is just answering questions that the public have in general. So if you see something weird about a tree that year, you can call, send pictures. Hi, Bridget. And and I can come do site visits, anything like that. So it's going to be an interesting year, given we had the freeze and now we've had a lot of moisture. So it's kind of just a plethora of fungus out there. So we may be seeing a lot of interesting things this summer. So Barb has my contact information. Bridget has my contact information. And you can look it up online, but feel free to email, call if you have any questions this year in the woods, even if they're not your woods, if you're on public property or something like that. So great.
Awesome. Yeah, this is also like an unveiling. This is sort of like a soft opening for our new trail that we just blazed here at the Rogers Lot, and the new parking lot that Keith and the highway department or town department put in. Road crew. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's amazing. So this is where we're all going to park now, and the trail is beckoning us. So let's proceed.
Yeah.
There's another. I thought it was going to take 3, but I'm only taking 1 now. So that's been good, studying the joy of inquiry, So Rogers Lot is one of the 2 town forests in Danville, and it's 100 acres. And it's also the site of the stump dump. There was some logging work that had been done here a couple years ago based on our management plan. And based on that work, now we're getting in here and being able to make some trails and create a community place for the town to come and recreate. So we're very excited.
So basically it's this low-lying, not everything you see, but this low-lying carpet of greenery. This is the goutweed. There are other things that are growing in here that I'll try and point out. There are some ash tree seedlings. So like this is an ash tree seedling and this is an ash tree seedling, and I'll try and point out some differences. Goutweed, like an ash tree, it has what's called a compound leaf, which means there's multiple leaves in a leaflet. So that's a little bit similar, but a big difference between an ash tree and goutweed is goutweed is not woody. Ash tree is a woody stem. It will eventually become a woody stem. And also goutweed, I'm just gonna pull up a leaf. Goutweed's edges are, we call it serrated, so they have those little like knifey edges in it, where an ash leaf is pretty smooth. There are other lookalikes from the goutweed. Elderberry kind of looks like it. Another key piece about the goutweed, which is a little trickier, It's called what is so it's not woody, which is a key piece. Elderberry is woody as well, but it's alternately leaved instead of oppositely leaved. And if you look at it's easier to see on an ash tree, but if you look at the branching or the buds, they're directly across from one another. You can see that. Maybe see it a little clearer up here. No, there's none doing that. That's well, if you look at the buds, you can see it. That the bud scars are directly opposite one another. And goutweed is not like that. They stagger, so they're alternate. So that's a good way to tell the difference. You don't always see ash trees growing in the mix of it, but if you're going in and wanting to pull some of it, it's just nice to know those differences. I would look for the serrated leaf edges. I don't know if the variety that came in here does this. Maybe you've been here. Those of you who've been here a long time, if it's sometimes it starts to get that whitish color on it. Have any of you seen that happen here?
Is the snow on the mountain?
Like
Yeah.
variegated,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not seen it here.
Here,
myself,
okay. So
but
it's highly
I can look
variety.
at it.
Yeah, so it's not always a good indicator. Some varieties do. Okay, I just wanted to stop. So just so you know what it looks like, and now you can kind of see that it really is invading this area and choking out a lot of other native vegetation.
Like
But-
nettle. I feel like I saw some nettle, and
Oh.
then
Don't let me touch.
or, no, yeah, last night when I was weed whacking.
good.
And then I was like, and then there was goutweed everywhere. So I wondered if the nettle used to be the carpet. I don't know.
Yeah,
I have
no,
no
I
idea.
think that's
But
exactly
nettle
what
is a
happens.
carpet, and
Yeah.
now I feel like this is the carpet.
Yeah, yes.
But I don't know.
I think that's
You
a
can see it
great
goes all the way through.
all the way
Can
through.
you talk about control of goutweed?
I can. I was going to talk a little bit about invasive plants in general, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to do a brief introductory. Can you all hear me? I guess I'll face
Yeah.
you.
And
I'll stand
you
in
were
the
gonna point out
sea
the
of
flower
goutweed.
too.
Yes, we found some flowering. The flower will turn white. There is another native plant that looks a lot like goutweed. We don't have it really a lot here. It is in Vermont, but it has a yellow flowering umbel, and goutweed has a white flowering umbel. Does anyone know what family it might be in? Because it has that nice umbelled flat flower.
Carrot.
You got it. It's in the carrot family.
Literary.
Like Queen and Slace, carrot family. So invasive plants, I like to just talk about them a little bit. It's really fun working in the woods, kind of like Bridget was saying like, oh, doing a little bit of like digging and thinking about like what might have happened here, how did this arrive, what was here before. It's really fun to play those games because there's a lot of scenarios, and really I think the magic of working in the woods is we don't know everything. We're never going to know everything, and we're learning constantly, so it's just wonderful. And I know there's a lot of like harsh language used around invasive plants, and they can be a nuisance for a lot of reasons, which we'll talk about. But I've been trying to get people to think about their perspective when thinking about invasive plants. You know, some people are like right side or left side dominant. You know, there's just different perspectives when you think about invasive plants. And really an invasive plant, for it to be considered an invasive plant and just not a non-native plant, it has to have evolved somewhere other than here, and it has to cause harm to something we place value on, like the environment, human health, the economy even. So that's how we kind of decide whether it's an invasive or not. Agriculture goes a whole other level and declares things as noxious, which goutweed is noxious, so there are rules and regulations around that now. There's a slug on it, how special. It's the season of slugs. Yeah, exactly. So what I like to tell people, and I know it can be frustrating, especially if you're in the middle of a big mitigation project and you're pulling a plant or dealing with a plant somehow, that invasive plants are just that. They're just plants. They're just trying to do what they do. They're not fighting us. They're just being
They're really
plants.
not evil.
They're not evil. So try not to assign them names. Yes. So they're just doing their thing, and I try and like shift the perspective to what, why they're here and what they're doing. That said, I think there's a lot of value in trying to mitigate a few of these invasive plants that we have around here, especially where we are in the Northeast Kingdom, because we just don't have the expansive populations of invasive plants that really the rest of the state has. Like, we're very fortunate, and so we're at this key point where we can make decisions and we can make some mitigation efforts and maybe not eradicate, but we can certainly have a maybe healthier relationship with it. And yes, so on to goutweed specifically. Any questions on invasive plants, by the way, just in general, overall, why we decide they are what they are?
Is in this battle between invasive plants and the natives, in most places in the Northeast, will the natives ultimately win out or not?
No. Yes. That's actually another piece of the kind of perspective conversation that I'll have when I'm giving a PowerPoint is like, I like to think about it as the plant's doing their plant thing, and let's just think about it like that. But the other thing is that there's this chart that we've drawn about kind of a relationship about when you notice the plant versus when you start doing something about it. And oftentimes the plant, when it's at a low population, no one does anything because it's not a problem. And then when it's a high population, that's when all the attention comes on. So you try and shift it down the line a little bit and try and mitigate when you're at an earlier stage. And you know, the state of Vermont as a whole has been shifting very rapidly within the last few months and trying to do more things like this and get a little bit more community involvement, which I'm excited about in the Northeast because we really have an opportunity to bring awareness to activities, how it's spread, maybe prevent things that probably started this in the beginning. You know, another thing I like to point out, we are learning constantly. And at some point, we thought this was a good idea to bring in and plant. So it's like we are learning more and more. And yeah. Yes. So why we deem invasives, you know, not a great thing, and why we decide to mitigate them? Do you know why we don't like invasive plants? I'm sure you have many reasons. Why don't you?
Often do outcompete the natives.
They outcompete the natives, and why isn't that a good thing?
Well, there's lots of other things that depend on native plants.
Yes.
Upsets the whole
It'll
ecosystem.
become
Yeah.
monoculture
Yes.
if it goes to the extreme.
Yes, and we don't like monocultures because that's not very resilient. You know, something can happen, wipe a monoculture out. We like the diversity of ages, of species, and like you pointed out, and a lot of very smart people have proven, there's a lot of wildlife and all other things in the ecosystem that rely and utilize native plants, and they actively avoid invasive plants because they just haven't evolved here with our ecosystem. There's no check and balance. A lot of invasive plants are called it's called alleliopathic, which some of you are nodding yes, which means it's kind of basically shooting out like mean gases and saying, no, I don't want anything else growing here. So they'll actively, to your point, they'll actively push out and kill the native plants. So they're just, because they didn't evolve here, they really, they have a way of doing just this, of really just taking off, getting rid of everything in its path and creating this monoculture and choking out native plants. And knotweed and goutweed are actually, they're not in the same family, but they're very similar in how they behave and how they spread. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Listening to that. I like to talk about just overall picture. What? Okay, any questions on invasives in general? You had a question before.
I have a question about how goutweed spreads.
Yes.
Is it?
Let's do that.
Because yeah,
Let's get
I'm like, yeah, I want to know how does it spread.
So goutweed, we talked about how to identify it, the serrated leaves, compound leaf, which means multiple leaflets on a leaf. The flower, which it should be starting to flower now, has that umbel. It'll create a nice white umbel, and then it'll create some like brownish seeds later on in the fall. And the way it spreads, and I'll jump ahead when we see knotweed, is the same way knotweed spreads, is pretty much by rhizomes. So it's under the ground. It's really not by seed. There's question on both of these plants about whether the seeds are actually viable anytime, and it kind of goes either way. I think we've kind of leaned with knotweed that like, yes, the seeds can be viable and we should be more careful with them. Goutweed, that's the jury's still out, but really the primary spread is by rhizome. So like when you're weeding grass out of your garden and you're like, I just can't get it all out, you know, it's that. And so it's like kind of like the beach, you know, there'll be a runner underground that'll just shoot more up. And like if we were to kind of just pull the surface, like not pull the roots or anything, but just pull the surface right now in the heart of early summer, that would just vigorously grow back, just like a beech tree if you cut it in this June. So that's the primary spread, and that's what makes mitigation of both goutweed and knotweed so delicate, because if you were to just pull a bunch up and put a pile, what would happen to that pile? Yes, you know. Okay. So,
So as we're doing trail work here,
yeah.
yeah,
That and
that's scary. I'm like, I'm not bringing my tools here. No.
no. And maybe
Yeah.
it's
So,
something.
Yeah. What about that?
Yes,
We
that's
clean it before we leave.
Yes,
Yep.
and that's something I was going to say. You know, Matt Langless, I know, manages a lot of things on the town force, and he's really good about this. But one of the huge prevention efforts for goutweed and knotweed and any invasive plant is if you have work done here, if you have road work, logging, and anything with equipment coming in here or tools, you can write into their contract to clean their equipment before they come in. And so on state land, we have that. And you can see, you know, with garlic mustard in the south, the other places, you can see the tracks of where a skidder came in. And, you know, they just don't know. It's no one's fault, but it's like the more we know, you know. So cleaning your tools, I might recommend doing something like, it's annoying, but to the degree that you can, if you run across it, maybe skip that section and then come back to it and try and do that last. And really, if you just spray down your tools with goutweed, that'll be enough. It's not like tiny, intricate little seeds, you know, it's just chunk of the plant. But it's a great question. I thought about that with trail work. I was like, well, but you know, it's also already here, so.
Well, we thought about it.
Yeah,
We did
well
think
done.
about it. Yeah, we washed our stuff off.
Good,
When,
yeah.
We were
yeah.
scared.
I think
Yeah.
just spraying it is the best, and maybe spraying it in an area that it exists. Or,
So when you say spray it, what are you spraying it with?
Oh, just water. Just
Okay,
basically, just
just to
make sure
rinse
to
it
just
off.
exact. And same with the logging equipment. Just, you know, a
Yeah.
lot of places that have heavy equipment have a pressure washer. So just spraying to get the physical plant material off. No sanitation is needed. It's just so that you're not carrying chunks of rhizomes around with you.
So is it mainly like the root? I mean, if there's like leaves or anything, that's not a big deal.
So it predominantly spreads by rhizome, but
Okay.
it can spread by the plant material as well. It's just it's a delicate thing about where the stem and the rhizome join. So
I see.
I
Gotcha.
generally
Okay.
have the root. Knotweed is
Yeah.
a whole other game, but goutweed is still, I try and say, like, there's this term called layering. Honeysuckle does this as well. I don't know why they had to call it something fancy, but basically if you pull like a honeysuckle out of the ground and leave it on the ground, the stem will actually sprout from the stem. And barberry actually does that, despite what people thought at the beginning. So in general, it's a good idea to just remove all of the plants. So, okay, we're skipping right to mitigation. Do you have more questions about the plant? Well, I will say, does anyone know when it came here?
This?
Yes, goutweed. Not here to Danville, but here to America.
Yeah, no, I was curious about that.
Yes.
Where's its origin?
Any guesses? What's your guess on origin?
Asia.
No.
No.
Actually, most of our invasive plants came from someplace else. Yes. And why do you think that happened?
They thought they were valuable and ornamental, and they brought them and planted them.
And since it's goutweed, was it ever medicinal for gout or something? I mean, why is it
No.
called gout?
You know, there's another common name for it too, and I can't remember what it's called. Do you remember the other common name? There's another.
Bishops.
Yes. Yep.
Bishop's
You
weed.
got it.
Bishop.
So I
and
actually
the white is snow on the mountain.
Yes.
Same plant. Right.
Yes. I was just telling someone this because they were common names are whatever anyone wants them to be. So I try and use scientific names often. And my friend was just asking about making an ice cream flavor and the common name of this plant. And I was like, you can call it whatever you want. That's what people did when they named common names. So you can call it whatever you want to call it. But yes, anyways, I digress. But it came, so yes, someone had a guess of where it came, Europe. And a lot of our invasive plants came here from Europe because we had a lot of European settlers bringing things that may have behaved differently over there, and they were pretty and landscapey, and they brought them here, and they were pretty and landscapey, and then they took over their whole lawn and forest. Anyone have a guess on what year it came here? To the year? Oh, okay. It was 1867. But I learned that for today. I always know it's late 1800s.
Wow, so wild.
Long time.
Yeah, in Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they eat it? Is it edible?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Bridget?
I don't.
I don't
No.
toy too much with.
It's kind of new to me in the last 5 years. I didn't notice it until the last, few years.
honestly, the same is for me. This is not an invasive plant that has received a lot of focus, and it's really receiving more focus. Willoughby State Forest is not an area with a lot of invasive plants, but if you go in between the beach and the Notch House, there is a carpet of it. It's very interesting. And so that really was what took my attention, is that it just kind of kept spreading.
I
And
think gardeners have been like aware of it,
Yes.
fighting it for forever. But,
Yes.
but like you said, we just haven't been thinking about it.
as a forest thing. And I often dismissed it. I was like, you know what, we're gonna deal with the barberry. We're gonna ignore this, because it really was what I saw as like a landscaping problem, or a garden, like someone would plant and it would take over the perennial bed. But now we're seeing it, that it is just like a beech tree, extremely shade tolerant, and does quite well in the understory of a forest, which is a real bummer.
I've been watching it march down Keyser Pond Road.
Oh,
I mean, I tried to pull it.
Route 2B, yeah.
And the whole everywhere.
Yeah. So it's like, and it's one of those things that once you see it, you're gonna, on your drive home today, you're all gonna be like,
So I just looked it up,
yeah,
and apparently it is edible.
okay.
The Romans brought it to the UK as a food source.
Interesting. Well, that's nice. Okay, I'm not wearing my, I'm not gonna tell you to eat anything, okay? You take your own risks with that.
There you go.
Did you get the Latin name for it when you looked it up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't memorize it.
I know the genus is
amazing you have
PO.
service here.
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
Egopodium podagraria.
Yeah, it's like, which sounds a lot like a grass, which is interesting because of the rhizome spread.
So you were going to talk about the control.
The control.
mitigation.
Yeah.
Let's get into the fun
Yeah.
stuff. Okay, what you're all here for. Like I talked about, just if you just remove the top portion, that's really not going to do anything, except possibly spread it more if you don't deal with the top material, and it's just going to grow back. It could stress it out a little bit, but that's about it. The best way to get rid of it is either with mechanical options or chemical options. I'll talk about both. You can choose to do whatever you want. People have opinions on both. There's no perfect solution to any of these things. I just consider all of this knowledge little tools in our toolboxes that you can pick away at and learn more about. The first option for mechanical is to, just like dealing with that pesky grass in your garden, is to literally weed it and try your darndest to pull it up by the roots. Something that people are doing more and more of is doing a combination of pulling and then tarping with black plastic, which honestly, if you think about it, it is how you deal with grass if you're trying to, like, establish a new area of garden or something like that. That is a lot of work. I know I already talked about this, but it's just something to keep in mind. The goal, I think, should never be to eradicate a plant, because you'll drive yourself crazy. And it's just to kind of mitigate it and maybe get more native plants in the mix there. And I think if one were to choose the mechanical route for goutweed, I think a good way to do it is to first get an idea of where it is, map the population, get a size, get a location, area, and then make a plan and just say, we're going to cover this section this year, and we're going to pull it up, and we're going to tarp it, or we're just going to pull it up, and then pick another section the next year, and just kind of keep going that way. I think that's the best way to go at it, slow and steady. I think people often jump in, myself included, and we're like, we're going to pull it all, and then it's just sad. Excuse me, and disheartening. The important thing was, if you pull it up, what do you think you need to do with it? Any guesses on what to do with it?
Don't put it in your compost.
Yes. Never compost it. Yes. Do not compost it. Just like knotweed, do not compost it. It will spread everywhere. So.
Take it to the stump dump.
Take it to the stump dump.
No, that is not okay.
So, bag it in I'd say, heavy duty trash bags, and then you can just tie it up and leave it out, ideally not somewhere near water where it could accidentally get washed away or something. Sometimes if we're doing a big project with invasives, we'll put down a tarp and get a bunch of bags of the plant and then leave it on the tarp just as an extra layer of security. If you leave it there for about a week, it should be fine. And then at that point, you'll want to take it to the transfer station. Call them ahead of time and tell them what you're doing. But I think the St. J, I brought invasive plants to St. J before. And it seems silly to bring a trash bag full of plant to a dump, but that's really the best way to.
Do they
Make
charge
sure.
you less than they do for garbage?
No.
No.
Buy the bag. Yeah.
No.
Sorry.
So what happens if you don't pull or cut it and you just put the black plastic down? Because that's what happened at my house.
Yep, you can do that as well.
Oh, okay, good.
Yep,
Good,
you can
good,
do that.
good.
It may take. The recommendation is to leave the plastic on for a full year, so all the seasons. It probably won't be 100% effective. You may have to keep doing it. I think another great option. I hesitate to say a mower unless you have a bag, like not a mower that cuts and like sprays like mine does, but if you have a bag on it, if you can mow it to the ground, you'll have an easier time covering it, and also you're creating that stressed environment by like, all right, the roots are going to get excited a little again, and then covering it so it'll try and sprout under that darkness and just have a failed time. Much like beech, it's very similar to beech trees and these other shade tolerance. Timing can be a key factor. Really, it doesn't matter. If you're going to do mechanical work, you could do it anytime the leaves are out, and just make sure you pull as much as you can. Even pull material around it so you get all the little rhizomes. So you can even use trail tools and like rub up the ground. It's really aggressive and disruptive, but it is effective, and it moves a lot of material. But if you
use flames?
Flame is not a great option for goutweed
Because of the rhizomes.
Exactly. That does not mean that it won't be a good option tomorrow. Like this is one of those things that we're learning more and more about. Flame is also not a good option for knotweed, and we pretty much. I don't think that's going to change. Just because the root system is so incredibly deep on knotweed, goutweed it's not as deep. But no, flames haven't been super effective. Although I do want to look more into it because there are other states that get a little more creative. But we are learning more and more about plants all the time. You know, Europe is doing really creative things with boiling water and different plants, like giant hogweed. So it's a little tricky to do field work with boiling water, but you know.
I got rid of some incipient poison ivy with boiling water.
That makes
right.
sense. Yep.
The other thing that at a different workshop I was at, and this kind of really revolutionized what I've been doing at home and really helped, said, do the perimeters.
The perimeter.
Do the perimeter, because that way it's not, because I was like you, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this section now. And of course, everything else is just getting bigger and bigger.
That's a great idea.
So
yeah,
I just thought I'd pass that along.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I should have started my talk by saying this with my hat on. We have an incredible website, and I'm not just saying that because I'm wearing the hat. It really is an incredible website. I use it. It's VT Invasives, and I can send that website to you, but you can also maybe remember it. Some of you seem to know it. It has things about land invasives, invasive insects, pathogens, and aquatic invasives too, which I really don't know anything about. But there's incredible fact sheet information on it, just about the biology, the spread, mitigation, and it's constantly being updated. There are also tools on there, not plant specific, but just with ideas on how to do treatment, like how to take on a project. There's a nice instruction sheet on how they recommend mapping out a project, because that can be overwhelming. There's free apps to download. Pretty much anyone can do mapping nowadays. It's not a big fancy GPS system anymore. So, and that's, I'd be willing to help if the town wanted to do a project. I'd be willing to come out and kind of lead a little bit more or something, an effort like that. But yes, so I would recommend checking out VT Invasives for any of your invasive plant needs and questions. But anyways, yes, so mitigation, the timing. If you stress out the plant right now, there are a lot of stores in those root systems right now. So if you pull out the plant now, or you just cut off the top right now, or you pull out the plant and leave a little rhizome in there, that rhizome's still going to have a lot of energy in it, and it's just going to spring to the sky. If you pull it out closer to winter, most of those stores have been used up all summer. And so if you're doing it at the end of the summer or the fall, the likelihood of that sprouting is a little bit less, or it's going to tire out that rhizome a little bit more than if you did it in, say, July. So I try not to focus on the timing, because really just pulling it at any time is a positive. But if you have the option to do it in like August or September, that's a pro. That's a bonus. Other questions on the mechanical options? I know that's a little overwhelming. Yes, please.
It seems, I mean, obviously you know what you're talking about, but it seems counterintuitive that the rhizomes would have the least energy at the end of the season when they're about to hibernate.
So that is also, the timing is important. If you were to do it in the, like for a beech tree, for example, if you do it into the fall when the leaves have let go, then you're right. The stores are all full again. But if you got to get that sweet spot where
Okay.
it's like end of summer, I like to say, don't push it too far into the fall, because you're right. Like if you get too far into the other side, then they are ready to go. They're like, this is all, everything's underground. So end of summer when they've kind of used everything up is your sweet spot. But you're right. It's a good point. And then, of course, with goutweed, it's a little easier because then it just goes away and you don't see it. So you're not risking that. Any questions?
Yeah, what would happen if you had a patch of this
Yes.
and you mowed it real short
Yep.
and then just kept mowing it?
So there's not a lot of success with that, basically. It's a really strong rhizome system. It's a lot like grass. The rhizomes will just keep spreading and spreading, so no one has had success with that. It will stress the plant out, but not to a degree where you'll really see a diminishing.
Even though you're
Yeah.
you're not allowing any leaves to form.
Yeah.
So it's not picking up any energy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but I don't know if it's such a low growing plant.
Sure.
I think that there would always be some greenery growing like that. I don't know, but yeah, it's like, I'm like, I don't know if you mowed it every other day forever. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's tried that, but you'd have to have a mower that like,
I imagine no one's tried to mow it forever.
yeah.
Not yet.
Just a guess.
Yes. It is a lot about, what you have time for,
Sure.
what the scale of the project is, what the energy is around it. I was thinking about, Danville is such an amazing community, so much energy around, your natural resources. And you really I don't know, there's a spotlight on all of you, so well done with your ash inventories and whatnot. But something that might be worth trying to promote on social media or through town websites is talking about how it spreads and people bringing their plants here, a little information about the identification, maybe link to BT invasives and say, don't bring your invasive plants to the stump dump. I don't know. I know it's never going to catch everyone, but it might people, I'm sure, are not doing it with any intent of ill harm.
My thought would be that not to try to eliminate it from this forest, but to establish some demonstration plots.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Because teaching is the important part here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And some people may just get it started, just beginning to get it going.
Yep.
Other people may have it long established and have a more difficult job. But I think approaches, maybe there's one or two different approaches. That, unfortunately, the cutting, repeated cutting, which I think would work if you had an isolated patch and you did it for about 2 or 3 years.
Yes, a lot.
That repeated cutting, which is obviously beyond the pale. I mean,
Right.
for most
You
people,
have to
but
cut it right.
Like the new Sisyphus.
some old flats that are retired might be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting, but you would have to cut it so regularly. You think about grass. You cut your grass all the time, and it does not go away. And you'd have to have something that would cut really, really low, but it's worth a try, I think demonstration is a great idea for a community forest. Do multiple treatments, have a little sign, or do tours or something like that. I can assist with that as well. I think that's a great idea. And it, then someone learns something and takes it home and spreads that knowledge and maybe tries something at their property as well.
Well, I think the people establishing those demonstration plots would learn as well.
Yes, they would. We all will. We all learn as we muddle through these plants. And you brought out something about establishing. When with something like goutweed, it's a little different than like a honeysuckle or barberry, where you may have other native plants around. But with goutweed, as you can see, it's really choking out a lot of other things. So if you can imagine someone were to take this little patch right here and dig it all up, and then you have all of this exposed soil. And with little chunks of rhizome that I'm sure are still there, and fortunately not around here. There's not a seed bank of barberry around, but oftentimes when we expose a whole bunch of soil, another invasive plant will come in and take over. There are programs BT Invasives will clue you into this to get people free or less expensive native plants to plant in place of that. And on the page for goutweed, there's a list of plants that they recommend that match the habitat and kind of match its effect, because putting in trees here might not be the most effective thing because it's not mimicking the same plant pattern. So something like ferns, like sweet fern or ostrich fern or something like that might be a good option. There's a bunch of plants on there that are, so that's something I like to try and couple removing plants with maybe establishing a few things too, because even though the goutweed wants to take over the native plants can at least act as a barrier while you're doing some mitigation.
So Angie, you've got a lot of plots to establish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the one in the forest is really, that would be amazing to see. Everybody has to see it.
Okay.
It's incredible. It's huge, and it's like the only thing there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That'll
it's
be
like,
a great spot to
Yeah.
do something. Fun. Well, now I'm invested. So.
Yeah, well, I have a question. So, like, how worried should we be about people walking through it and potentially taking it home with them?
Yes, that's a concern.
Yep.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is a concern. Yep. Yeah. So maybe we walk to the edge of it. Yeah. And not go through it. Do we have to go through
I
it?
weed whacked it last night, but not the whole thing.
I
don't think we can walk.
I think you'll be okay in terms of like, maybe just take note, and it really is spread by the rhizomes and the chunk of plant. It's not
Stay
like
on top
tiny, it's not like the nematodes from beach leaf disease.
Right.
So just, it's like and that's good practice with any of the things that we're kind of dealing with in the woods that have been coming in and taking over in ways is like maybe just rinse off your boots, like spray them out.
And bikes, because this is going to be a bike trail. So
Right, and bikes. But I mean,
I
maybe
could see more of that. Yeah.
we'd just really like dig out the
Focus on the
trail
trail.
in that area so
Yep.
that it's not, unless someone falls over into it,
Yeah.
they're not really gonna.
And if you're working on the trail and you're going right through it, if you want to dig that up and throw it in the affected area, like you're not going to change anything. So it's like, don't worry about like, no, we have all this material. People get so invested in like, oh, pull out the plant, and then they forget that they have to do something with the plant. But in that example, you could just like, it's not going to change. Are there other questions on the mechanical options for treating? Does anyone want me to talk about the chemical treatments? Some people don't want to. Some people only want me to talk about chemical options.
You should probably talk about it.
I'm going to bring it up.
It'd be nice.
Yeah. So the chemical options are extremely effective with goutweed. I'm not clearing my throat for any important purpose. I was something in my throat. And I have not done any treatment of goutweed because, kind of like Bridget was saying, this has not been high on our list recently up here. So I've been dealing with bigger plants and other mitigation options. You can sometimes combine mechanical and chemical. That's been my new favorite thing to do. Some mechanical effort, because then what you're doing is reducing the amount of above ground material that you would then have to treat with a chemical. So you're reducing the amount of chemical you'd have to use. And that would be especially effective if you did some sort of pulling or tarping effort and then you had little bits coming back up. That would be the nice time to do it. I am a certified pesticide applicator, so I am allowed to talk about pesticides. If you are in your home, you are allowed to kind of do whatever you want, buy whatever is legal. But if you're to do anything on a community forest or get into any other crazy pesticides which are not recommended for this plant, you'll have to look up rules on the Department, Agency of Ag stuff. So I just had to put that out there. That's all on btinvasives.org as well. Everything's on there. Anything you could ever want. The best chemical for this is also the most benign, which is glyphosate, because it's a systemic. It's not using a contact herbicide. So pesticide is I use pesticide and herbicide interchangeably. Pesticide is the big family, and then there's lots of different types of pesticides, and herbicide is a type of pesticide. So you wouldn't want to use a contact herbicide, which those tend to be nastier anyways for the environment and for human health. Glyphosate, you can do a foliar spray. Always follow the label. The label is a law. In general, with foliar sprays in a plant, you use a 2% dilution, so it's very, very dilute. It's essentially water. It's systemic, it's soil soluble, so it basically touches the plant and affects the plant inside and stops when it hits the soil and does not spread. So when I have done treatments, I have done a treatment of a small barberry bush. There have been sugar maple seedlings underneath it. I will treat the barberry and the sugar maple seedlings grow. It's kind of remarkable.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing. And it's not perfect. It's not without its faults. When I say systemic, what happens to it, and it just affects the plant's ability to photosynthesize. So in terms of human health, it's much better because I don't photosynthesize yet. Sometimes in the winter I feel like I should. Yeah, I try. So it's just, that's really the only option, is to use a glyphosate or triclopyr, but I personally prefer glyphosate. There are a lot of different products that contain the active ingredient of glyphosate. I'm getting like in the weeds, not to be funny, but you can look all this up and I'll move on from this. But I'd just like to give this warning. Roundup is a product that has glyphosate as an active ingredient. There are a lot of different types of Roundup that will have different ingredients and different surfactants in it, and they've gone a long ways. So there are versions of Roundup that have other active ingredients that might kill a tree or something else. So you want to be really careful and work with someone who knows, and make sure you're getting the product that has just glyphosate as that active ingredient. There are other products. My preferred is Rodeo, which doesn't have a surfactant added in, and the surfactants can be a little bit nasty. So we tend to use Rodeo when we're working near or in water. It's an approved wetland product. Anyway, you all seem interested, so I kept going. Yeah.
So, what species?
American Beach.
Say it loud.
Excuse me? Oh, American Beach.
There you go. It's American Beach. And and what's this on it? Yeah. So where do you think this grew? Think about where do nuts grow on a tree?
My trees.
Yeah. Normally they don't. Beech does not produce nuts until it's about 40 years old. So, for those of you who were with me, where was this?
Right here.
It was not that high. It was down below.
Oh my gosh.
So, what do you think that is then?
It's really stressed.
It's a sprout off of a root system of a mature tree. And we have this debate over whether those sprouts will ever become trees or not. Well, if you think about the physiology, it's already a tree, because here it is producing a nut that normally isn't produced on a tree until it's approximately 40 years old. And that was like that high off the ground.
So is all of
and
that a
the
stress
sprout is like
response?
2 years old.
Is it a stress response?
No.
No.
It's just that there's a difference between a sprout and a seedling.
Yep.
Seedling wouldn't produce this until it's 40 years old, but a sprout coming off of a mature tree contains some of the mature genetics and age relationships of a mature tree.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that makes it difficult to know if that tree that we see as a sprout, how old is that tree? How old is that sprout? And because lots of the times we're actually dealing with sprout origin beech trees.
Most of the time.
Coming from the root systems of a tree. And
How
so
far can those roots go from the main tree?
they can go quite some distance depending upon the soil and the moisture relationships. I've seen sprouts coming 40 feet away from a tree. That's not normally the case. Usually it's within almost the canopy area of the tree. And that's where you'll see them mostly. If you go through the woods in the late fall, for example, when the trees have already begun to shed their leaves, beech, being a member of that oak family, oak being a member of the beech family, I'll put it that way, oftentimes shed their leaves late, except for the young material coming out. And sometimes those sprouts, even though they may be genetically old, keep those leaves on until the next spring. And so if you look at the understory, you'll see all these leaves. And they're all practically beech. And it drives foresters, where's Emily? Drives foresters nuts.
I love beech. Yes, we deal with a lot of sprouts.
Yeah, because the sprouts interfere with the growth of other species. And they produce a very dense shade, and that becomes really tough. But anyway, this is not, you don't usually see this. I've seen it, the first time I saw it was in France, actually, on a European beach. And I've seen it many times since, but it's not common at all to see it not being produced. In fact, there was another one on that same sprout.
Same sprout.
Yeah. No, we don't, it looks like they're actually developing, but I haven't opened them to see if they're actually viable or not.
Yeah.
You want to do that?
Yeah,
We
let's
can
do
actually.
Let's let other people peel them open.
How old do you think the host tree was, Dave?
What's that?
How old do you think the host tree was, or the mother tree was?
I have no
Not
idea.
that old. It wasn't that big.
Well, remember
8-10 inches
that
Yeah.
in diameter.
you can get a beech tree this big around, and it might be 70 years old.
Yeah.
You can get a beech tree this big around, and it might be 15 years old. Depends upon the amount of light, moisture, and all that. But it will grow in the shade of other trees for a long, long time, and continue to grow upward if light is produced by thinning the other species around it.
So where's the mother tree? Let's see.
Well, it's way back.
Way back.
He's been carrying that for a while.
I've been carrying it around. No, I didn't pull it off the roadway here.
This is our gigantic plot of
this
Japanese
one
knotweed.
succeeded.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
No, I
last-
mean
last year,
yeah.
Bear and
Knotweed
I got
selfie.
with almost touching distance because of a dead stand of knotweed like
That
that.
makes sense. You can't see anything.
No, the bear was much bigger than I was, fortunately.
What? So were there other? Where would the plot scenario?
Oh, we've kind of disbanded our work here at the plot, so
This is the result of the town clearing out ditches along the way and bringing it in here and dumping all the stuff. So all that high bank right there, that's all stuff that's been dumped by the town over time.
So that's the far end. Like the road is on the other side of that. So
Right.
they come in, dump it, and then they do push it over the bank. This is
Right,
what I was
right.
wondering. That explains
Right.
a lot.
And so they brought it in here
Yeah.
over many, many years.
Yeah.
And it got to be a huge spot. I thought, well, let's see if we can't make use of that spot
Yeah.
to
I
try
love
some
it.
treatments.
I
And
love it.
this one was chemical. It's a,
So smart.
I can't remember the size. It's like, it's a
was like
fraction of an acre. You know, it's like a,
we did wasn't it 15 by 15 plot, three plots of 15 or 20 by 20?
yeah.
Yeah.
About 15 by 15 foot square, or maybe
Yeah.
20 by 20 foot square, something like that.
And what did you do with the plant residue? You take it to the transfer
just
station?
We
off
just
to the
left
side.
it
Oh, you left it?
to the side. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, obviously.
Oh yeah.
We're not
It
thinking
was
about
still
it.
here.
We weren't really worried about spreading.
Right.
Right.
Because you were like, it's kind of like the goutweed on the trail, yeah. But do you want to talk a little bit about knotweed before we?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So I did want to bring up one thing. VT Invasives, I know, talks about mechanical treatment options, chemical treatment options. There's two other treatment options I talked about with a couple of people while we were walking that everyone didn't get to hear, biological and cultural. And cultural is kind of like what would make it a less habitable site for this plant. And for goutweed and knotweed, there are no cultural options because it doesn't mind heat, the acidity level of the soil, it just can grow in anything. So that's not an option, but oftentimes for an invasive plant, cultural is a type of control. Biological, as we were talking about, different biocontrol options, which means just something else that interacts with that plant in a way. So we have biocontrols for different fungal pathogens and insects, and there are, I was learning about in New Mexico, there are biocontrol options for invasive plants. I haven't witnessed that. There are no successful biocontrols or even attempts for these two plants, knotweed and goutweed. I just wanted to bring those up, that is a viable option. Okay, so knotweed, does everyone know what it looks like now? It's got that hollow stem, bamboo, flat base to the leaf, kind of like a spade shape. You can identify it because it grows in a monoculture and gets very, very tall. So you can see it any time of the year. In the winter it turns like reddish brown, so you can see kind of the skeletons of it all year. The flowers, which will be coming out later, are kind of like wisps of whitish green, kind of like a spray, I think we say, yes. Not every site will say this. Knotweed does spread by seed. Okay, I will say that with my hat on. Like, it will spread by seed, but it mostly spreads by every other part of the plant. So I know we were just talking about how easily it spreads, but if you break off a piece of that stem, a little chunk, and drop it on the ground, new plant. It's really intense. Does anyone know how deep the root system is underneath the knotweed?
As tall as it grows?
More than its height. So it is. So that's why mechanical options for knotweed are, I hate to say it, but like other than smothering, which is considered a mechanical option, but like cutting it, removing it, doesn't work. No one's ever had any success with any
I
of that.
had my son's whole soccer team, you know, for like early training, come and try to dig up all these rhizomes and plants. And then we had bonfires.
Yeah.
And everything, and then still 4 layers of plastic.
Yeah. It is. So that's also why I'm still interested in like learning about the relationship with heat and fire and goutweed, but knotweed, it has been proven not successful right now. And that's because that root system is so deep that you just can't. Usually how we do it is we don't light the thing on fire, we hold heat at the base and it stresses the plant out, which was very successful with barberry. So yes, that's why one of the more effective methods is the smothering technique, which you did try, and it does work. It takes a lot of work, and you can't partially cover it. You'd have to cover all of it because you are making a really nice organic layer base for another population to grow on top of it. So there's good. I won't go into it, but basically it's layering on. You're cutting it down to the ground, layering, covering it with wood chips if you want to make it look pretty, or just weighting it down and leaving it covered for a minimum of 5 years. It takes a long, I know. So it's a very, people don't love it. It just depends on, there's just a lot of questions to think about when you're choosing options for how to manage it. So it's just another tool in the toolbox for maybe a small patch or something like that. There's another new technique which is becoming more unpopular by the minute, but I loved it when it started, and it's taking, not everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say this. You know what hardware cloth is? It's like chicken wire, but denser, thick, rigid. So say this is your knotweed patch. Again, we're talking about a small knotweed patch. You'll take a piece of hardware cloth larger than the knotweed patch, cut it short to the ground, put all of the material in garbage bags and let it sit out for a week and then bring it to a transfer station, right? Yes, we don't compost it or anything, or burn it. And then actually you can burn the tops. If you let them sit out and die, you can burn the tops, but don't compost it, yes. So anyway, remove the tops responsibly, take the hardware cloth and put it over the knotweed, and then take whatever it is you have. If it's like big metal staples, or people will take like strips of lathe or wood and like get it into the ground, basically pin that hardware cloth to the ground, and then the knotweed starts growing up and basically like shreds itself as it grows up and like eviscerates itself. I know, right? It's like, yeah. So it is successful. It does take time, and you still have to manage that above ground growth because you are still getting these little chunks that can spread. But it does work. There's a demonstration site of this at a library in New Hampshire, somewhere in Coos County. That's not very helpful, but I can look it up if anyone wants to know. And again, I just want to bring that up. The more efficient and very effective method is, again, using chemicals. Glyphosate, rodeo, which uses glyphosate, is usually our treatment of choice. Typically you're seeing knotweed along roadsides because it's being spread like this. Equipment, little chunks, people are mowing the roadsides and spreading it. Our agencies are constantly working with Agency of Transportation, so fingers crossed we keep making progress with them on cleaning equipment or just choosing not to mow sections. Yes, mowing it, chemical, what was I saying? Glyphosate treatments.
So your
Yes.
chemical treatments, are you
Yes.
doing it with a cut and inject method or
I
a global?
There are a lot of different options. They're all written up on BT invasives. They're varying success. I've tried all of them. The snip and drip, which is what I would do for Phragmites, which cutting the top, having to deal with the top portion of the material, and then taking a tiny Nalgene and putting the material right in the stem, and then treating the top of the stem. I call that snip and drip. That's a higher concentration of the chemical you have to use. If you read the label, it's usually 50%. That is, I would say, ineffective. It will work a little bit, but it will not work for long, and it's just not as strong as effective. And that was really, people have just been trying that out because we're like, let's try anything. One of the best options, very time consuming, but you're using the least amount of chemical, is again a high concentration of just the injection, like literally taking a tool that injects it right into the plant. So then you're again only infecting that plant. It's systemic, it affects the plant, it hits the soil and ends. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So you often find knotweed along wet areas, riverbanks, wetlands. So I like to use Rodeo, that formula that uses glyphosate that's wetland friendly. That's my chemical of choice. There's also this thing called, I don't know if there's a better name for it. We call it the bloody glove. Have you heard of that? It's what do they call it on the label? There is a treatment, but it's basically you have a neoprene glove and you put chemical on the glove and rub the stem. It's effective. It is written on the label, but I believe it's called something other than that. It might not be.
I'd buy some.
Yeah, the glove of death.
You have to know all of this to pass your test to be an applicator, right?
You don't. Actually, it's much more safety, environmental, life cycles of insects and pests and diseases, highly biological. And there's lots of different tests depending on what you're doing. And then most of it is taking the test, reading a label. It's teaching you how to follow the label specifically. So yeah, many hours of tests. And yes, and then the other option is just like the goutweed, is an aerial spraying method. So a backpack pump or something like that, and treating the surface of it, which often we kind of stray away from that because there's the option to hit other things right around it. But with knotweed, as you see, there's really nothing else to hit. So it is a better option to do that. Again, like the goutweed, if you have the capacity to deal with the above ground mass of that plant, which again is a challenge in itself, ideally cutting it at some point in the summer and then spraying it. With that, I do it a little bit different than goutweed. I cut it early in the summer, so get that aggressive growth, and then treat it, or kind of early midsummer, and then I'll treat it chemically late in the summer, again when those reserves are tired up, so you kind of stress out the plant, maybe get a dense flush of growth, and then you have more above ground mass to treat, but it's still lower ideally. It doesn't matter if you can't, it's a lot to deal with cutting a plant and removing it properly, so sometimes it's better to treat it. And again, you can treat it aerially at any time of year. It is not 100% effective. I don't think anything is, but it is one of the more effective tools you can use. So, again, no cultural or biological options for knotweed yet that we know of. But there is a lot of research going into knotweed because of the impacts it has on wetlands and because of the impacts it has on erosion. Because it's choking out all the other vegetation, and even though it has that dense root mass, it's not the same as having trees. So you get banks that just fall down, as opposed to if you had, box elder or dogwood or birch or whatever, or willows holding in the bank. So there's a lot of energy and money and time being put into that one because of the impact it has on the economy as well. So this is maple leaf cutter. It affects pretty much sugar maple. It will affect other species. I don't know if any of you have noticed over the past like 4 to 5 years, in the late summer, early fall, the sugar maples look like Swiss cheese and kind of turn a yellowish brown earlier in the season. So this is the very early stages of that, which is, in my opinion, earlier than usual. I've been seeing it. Because it is eating the leaf and technically affects it in the later part of the season, it doesn't so much have an effect on the physiology of the tree. That said, we have had a number of years of this, so it is going to be interesting to see how this compiles with other stressors of the trees. But what they do is they cut little holes in the leaves, and these little brown spots are actually leaf particle, and they make little pita pockets of leaf particle, so the holes get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, so if you peeled that pita pocket apart, you would find a little tiny larva in there. So this is the larval stage, and then they will eventually, like late summer, early fall, this pita pocket, when it gets bigger, will actually fall through this hole, fall through the tree, and lay on the ground, and they'll pupate like that. And then in the spring, they'll emerge as adults, tiny moths with adorable orange mohawks. They're amazing. They hang out on the undersides of sugar maples, so in the early spring, it's fun. They're so cute. Anyway, fun. You can look at it if you feel like it.
Looking for ways to eliminate it?
No, this is a native species, so which means, like we talked about, it evolved here. It's not causing any harm to human environment or economy.
It could even be controlling for something else.
Right, we don't know. We don't want to get involved with it. There's lots of things at play in the ecosystem that involve this species. So this one is just a fun one.
And it's cute.
One thing.
Which counts for all.
Yeah, he
One
don't
thing
want to get rid of
to
it.
remember is that
Got a mohawk.
where you see this little patch on there, that's not where the hole is. They've actually cut the whole leaf, a little disc out, and moved it, and now that's over them. Now the next time, well, they'll actually move out a little bit bigger, further, and cut a little larger one, but that comes right back on top of this one. And they keep doing that. So if you actually, later on, you can peel back each of these things, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but the insect will be underneath the bottom one there.
You can do. I almost got one, but it was so small, it fell. But you could, if from tiny fingers, you could
Actually, you might, if you look sharp, you see right in the middle of that?
I do,
See
yeah.
that
I
tiny
do see the
little
little
thing?
dot.
That's the little insect that's
So is that
larvae
strictly
that's
to
in there,
build its
right inside that.
Oh, yeah.
It's not
It's
eating
totally
it.
Yeah.
seeds. It is eating
does
the
eat it?
leaf.
That's kinda neat.
Yeah.
Eats and poops and lives in that tiny pita pocket of leaf. So cute. And gets bigger and bigger. Adorable. And then this is the very early stages of, and if you hold it up to the light, you can tell. So you should hold it up to the light. Try and identify what's going on with this leaf. It's not cutting. What does that look like? Ugh, this is trickier. Someone already knows this.
Yeah.
So it's
Is it at the edge or in
that
the
middle
dark
part,
area?
yeah. So it's not removing all of the leaf material. It's we call it skeletonizing. So it kind of looks
sucking out
skeletal
the-
whole. Yeah, taking out little chunks. So it's a skeletonizer, and it's a maple trumpet skeletonizer. If you flip it over, this isn't actually the insect. This is the frass tube. So this is the poop, and it will get bigger and bigger, and eventually kind of fold over. This is another sugar maple. Yeah, and if you open it up, the frass tube kind of looks like, I think it looks like a Dr. Seuss trumpet. It's like, so maple trumpet skeletonizer on a maple tree, skeletonizing the leaf. The frass looks like a trumpet. We're very creative.
But that is an insect creating
That's an
it? Yeah.
insect larval stage, and again, it's another native insect, so evolved here and doesn't really do much damage other than looks funny on the leaves.
Create trumpets.
You get the